Welcome back, traders and investors. We have Chris Ciaccia on the line. He's a technology editor for TheStreet.com, joining us here on the show. How you doing this morning, Chris?
Good, Joe. Thanks for having me on this morning.
No, glad to have you. So let's first hop into things and talk about Amazon's new tablet. Is that something that's going to revive the stock? This thing has been disappointing the street for quite some time.
Well, I can't imagine that the sales of the tablet are going to revive the stock, but it is something that, I've had a chance to review, and I think, down the line can actually be a competitor to the new iPad Air. It's a lot cheaper than the iPad Air. It's $379, or starts at $379 versus $499 for the iPad Air 2. And they've worked quite a bit to improve both the software and the look and feel of the tablet. But the one big area where Amazon continues to lag behind Apple and Google is the app ecosystem. They only have about 240,000 apps for Amazon versus just 650,000 dedicated for the iPad alone. So Amazon has a lot of work to do.
And is it light, the tablet?
It's very light. It's under a pound. It's about 13 ounces. The screen size is very comparable to the iPad Air 2, a little bit smaller, but, I had a chance to review it for about a week or so. And, if I wasn't already locked into the Apple ecosystem, I would recommend buying it. I think it's going to be a great seller for the holiday season.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to that. All right, let's talk about Tesla here a little bit, and the stock rallied off earnings there. It's looking to sell 50,000 cars next year, which is not a whole heck of a lot, but the street cheered the earnings anyways. What is your appraisal of the Tesla earnings, and what are you looking at going forward?
Well, Tesla earnings obviously came in a little bit better than expected on both the top line and the bottom line. But the key focus that, I saw was the fact that their production levels still aren't where they need to be. They actually cut production forecasts or delivery forecasts for 2014 by 2,000 cars because of the slowdown and the retooling of the factory in the third quarter. And, they seem very confident about 50,000 cars into 2015 and growing revenue and production 50% per annum for the foreseeable future. But, they only have one plant right now, and, the Gigafactory is not up and running. So it remains to be seen whether they can actually get to that 50,000 number for next year. But they've been incredibly confident. They said they've learned a couple things from the retooling of the plant and the switching of the lines from production of the Model S into the D version of the Model S, and as well as building the prototypes of the Model X. So this is something that's going to be really worth watching for the rest of this year and probably all of 2015 as well.
And they are going ahead with that Gigafactory then. I know there was some debate that, whether or not actually it did hurt the stock initially. So where are they at on that?
They said, on the earnings call the other day that they're actually a little bit ahead of where they thought they would be in terms of producing a battery pack jointly with Panasonic, and that's partly due to the Gigafactory. They said they could probably come out with a joint battery pack from Panasonic by 2016, and that kind of bodes well for the Model 3, which is their third generation, $35,000 or so car. So if they can come out with that in 2016, whereas the street had been expecting 2017, that potentially means we could actually see a little bit more volume in the back half of 2016 and 2017 as well. And that's kind of what Tesla's been based off of, or the stock price has been based off of, is this production of the third generation car. Because, the Model S is a great car. I've driven it, I've reviewed it, but it's still incredibly expensive. And by adding a dual motor, that actually made it more expensive. So if they can actually get the electric car and their versions of the the mass market car down to roughly $35,000 or $40,000 base price, then that opens up their market to a humongous amount of consumers, including myself. So I mean, and quite a few other people who would be interested in buying an electric car at that price point.
And how many cars do you think they're going to have to sell to actually start making money?
Well, they actually made money last quarter on an adjusted basis. It was 2 cents a share, so they're profitable on a non-GAAP basis.
Mm-hmm.
Depending upon the quarter and certain capex expenditures. Because you got to remember, they're still a car company that's still in its early phase. It's tough to compare to Ford, GM, and Chrysler because those companies are close to 100 years old, if not more in some cases. So they have years and years of experience of manufacturing prowess and being able to cut costs and being able to do things efficiently. And Tesla's still in an early growth phase. So they've done a fairly good job of being able to be profitable, at this early stage in their life. But they still have quite a ways to go to get to be, the next Mercedes or the next BMW.
Okay. Do you think the other auto companies are going to finally, get up like Ford or GM and come out with, with a reasonably priced electric car? Do you see it? I mean, what's taking them so long, and do you see them getting up to snuff anytime soon?
Well, they actually, kind of eschewed the electric vehicle market for the longest time until they realized that, hey, wait a second, the Model S is incredibly popular. It's won so many awards. Consumer Reports has named it its car of the year back-to-back years. It's received a 5-star rating from the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration. It's one of the safest cars, if not the safest car out there. So it's an incredibly popular car. They're selling everything they can make. And that's part of the reason, that they're unable to deliver more cars this year is because they don't have the production capacity and they're selling everything that they can make. So now with that in mind, GM, Ford, and even BMW have come out and they've started to come out with their own electric cars. The i3 from BMW is not quite as popular because it's not as aesthetically pleasing as the Model S. It doesn't have the range that the Model S does. And GM's Volt has been a mixed success at best. And the task force that GM set up to actually watch and study Tesla's every move doesn't seem to be working out really well for them. So I don't think that they're going to catch up to Tesla anytime soon in the EV market. And let's face it, making an EV car is a lot harder when you're coming from an internal combustion background than it is when you're just starting from an EV background. So, I suspect that Tesla will probably have the lead in the EV market for, the foreseeable future.
Okay, Chris Ciaccia, technology editor for TheStreet.com, joining us here on Benzinga's pre-market prep, brought to you by MarketFi. All right, so you're not worried about Ford or GM getting into the fray here and taking away any kind of market share. Just what I've noticed over Tesla over the last month or so is it's been moving up when Elon Musk takes to the Twitter sphere here, and he came out. There was hype about the announcement of the D. When that kind of disappointed, the stock gave back. What was your assessment of that announcement?
I was at the event in Los Angeles, and I have to say, it was really, something else. I had a chance to go in the car. There were at least 2,000 people there. Some of my sources said it was as many as 4,000 or 5,000. And it goes 0 to 60 in 3.2. The auto drive features were incredible. I mean, the cameras recognize speed limit signs. They recognize cars in front of you that can park. So it's the fact that the stock got hit the next day. If you're a trader, that's one thing, but if you're a long-term investor, it's a little bit different. And obviously, the stock has rebounded off those levels. And Musk is, the P.T. Barnum of our time. He uses social media, especially Twitter, better than any other CEO that I've seen. He's a showman, unlike anybody since Steve Jobs. So this is really, he's really been an effective marketer and salesman for a company that, just 5 or 6 years ago was on the verge of bankruptcy. And, they had to inject more cash. And, there was a lot of problems with Tesla going on in the early features. And now Musk has turned this into a media darling and a Wall Street darling as well.
Question here out of the chat. Are the automakers pulling out of Tesla? Recently, Daimler and Toyota both have sold stakes.
Yeah, I've seen that, but like any good investor, they're going to take some money off the table. They invested early into Tesla. They've made quite a good profit on their stakes, and they're also realizing that Tesla is a bigger competitor to them, than they originally thought. So, why would you invest in your competitor? Because you're only helping them. So it only makes sense from a strategic standpoint, and they made money off of it. So you can't fault them there.
Okay. Just looking at some other technology stocks. I mean, the granddaddy of them all, Apple, just been plowing ahead since earnings, getting always a boost from Icon. Do you have any projections for Apple?
Yeah, I think the holiday season is going to be a gangbusters one for Apple for both the iPhone and the iPad. They've sold close to 50 million iPhones in last quarter, and that was with the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus being only out for a couple weeks. And just like Tesla, they're selling everything that they can make on those lines. So I would expect a humongous number on the iPhone line in the December quarter. I could see, perhaps as many as 70 million because they're already in China. There's pent-up demand here in North America and as well as Europe. And, the improvements that they made in the iPad were marginal at best, but I think the really big thing is the deal with IBM is really starting to take off now. Tim Cook kind of talked about that on the call and, how that's going to work and how that's beneficial for both parties. So I really think that Apple is going to have a gangbuster quarter. And 2015, I don't see any slowdown happening. Samsung's hurting on the top line. Their product lineup has been really stagnant at best. And Apple's really making inroads in China. It was just named the most admired brand in China, outpacing Samsung for the first time. So this is, Apple's year, for the next 18 months or so, because you have not only the new iPhones and iPads coming out, but you have the Apple Watch coming out in the spring. So, I mean, Apple is firing on all cylinders right now, and it's full speed ahead for Apple and Tim Cook.
Okay. Are there any technology stocks that maybe disappointed a little bit, got beat up by the street, and maybe instead of buying the stocks that are breaking out to all-time highs, which you probably should do, are there any stocks you feel that unnecessarily kind of got roughed up on earnings?
I think Google's kind of gotten a little bit of a unfair shake lately. We all know the problems that they've had with mobile ads, excuse me, and mobile revenue and cost per click trending down. But, Larry Page is not, managing this for quarter to quarter. Larry Page and his team are looking at this from a long-term perspective, and they're moving into other areas. They moved into Nest and home automation. They've got this big robot division. Google X, comes out with a new project seemingly every other week that people are blown away by. So, I would take a look at Google because not only, do they have the core search business, which is just an immense cash cow, but they have all these other ancillary projects that are the potential to be tens of billions of dollars in revenue in the not too distant future. And I've seen some people call it, almost kind of like a technology ETF, where you can just own Google and they're in so many different areas, so that if we were allowed to invest, and if I was a trader or an investor, it's something that I would be looking at adding at these levels.
Okay, I mean, since they split the stock, I mean, I feel like every time I look at one, I want to look at the other and add the two together, try and figure out where the actual price is. And it's really, I think that's a good point. It's really been kind of flying under the radar lately, but as you can look at the chart, it certainly not busting out to new all-time highs like the broad market and many other stocks. 3D Systems is due to announce earnings on Monday. This beleaguered sector has not been doing well. Do you have any comments on the 3D earnings that are coming out on Monday?
3D Systems is kind of, almost the redheaded stepchild of the 3D printing market. Stratasys right now is the leader because it owns MakerBot on the consumer front, and they have a really strong enterprise segment as well. HP just announced its own plans to get into the 3D printing market. So I can't foresee a whole lot from 3D systems outside of, perhaps, maybe a 1 or 2 day drift up, because sentiment is so low on the stock. Maybe they surprise the street. But, it's in terms of, looking out a little bit longer than just a few days, it doesn't seem like it's going too well for 3D systems. And if maybe you're a company that's looking to get into the 3D printing market, maybe if you're Dell or Lenovo or something, maybe you watch them and maybe eventually it becomes a takeover target, but I think probably at a much lower level. The fundamentals on the company are not particularly strong, and it just seems like maybe if you're in it for a quick 1 or 2 day trade, that's great. But if you're a fundamental investor and you're going to look to see the benefit that the 3D printing market has on society, 3D systems is not the way that I would play it.
Not the way to play it. 3D Systems. We've had Chris Ciaccia on Benzinga's Pre-Market Prep, brought to you by MarketFi, commenting on the Amazon tablet, Apple earnings, and also on the 3D printing sector. Chris, thanks a lot for coming on. Great informative interview and entertaining as well. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Great weekend. Hope to have you on again soon.
Thanks so much.